Snow White. The snow lay deep on the ground. At a window of the palace, the queen sat sewing and dreaming. As she sewed, her needle pricked her finger, and 3 bright drops of blood fell onto her embroidery. The queen looked at the drops, and suddenly she had a lovely thought. If my baby is a daughter, I want her to be as white as snow, as red as blood, and as black as the frame of this window, she said. Not long after, she gave birth. Her daughter was exactly as she'd imagined her. They called the baby Snow White, but sadly, her mother died within a few hours of her birth. A year later, the king remarried. The new queen was very beautiful, but so proud that she couldn't bear the thought of anyone being more beautiful than herself. In her room, she had a magic mirror. She would stare into it for hours on end and ask, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, am I the fairest of them all?" Without fail, the mirror answered, "Yes, O queen." But one day, when Snow White was 14 years old, the mirror said, "No, O queen, you no longer are. Snow White is more beautiful by far." The queen was so angry and upset that she couldn't sleep or eat. What was she to do? Then she made up her mind. She sent for her royal huntsman. "Take Snow White into the forest and kill her." The huntsman led Snow White away, but when he drew his knife, the girl began to cry. He couldn't kill her. Anyway, he thought, as she ran away among the trees, "Before night comes, a wolf or a bear will do my job for me." But Snow White wasn't killed by a wolf or a bear. As night fell, she came to a little house on the other side of the mountains. She knocked, but no one answered. Plucking up courage, she went inside. Here was a sight to cheer her up. A long table with 7 plates set and a row of 7 beds along the wall. Still no one came, and Snow White was so tired and hungry that she took a spoonful from each plate and lay down to sleep on the 7th bed. A little later, the house's owners returned. They were 7 dwarfs who worked in a silver mine deep under the mountains. "What a beautiful child," they said when they saw Snow White. When she woke in the morning, Snow White was terrified by the sight of the little men, but she soon learned how kind-hearted they were. They asked her to keep house for them, and she agreed at once. "Take care," said the dwarfs as they set off for work, "and don't open the door. One day your stepmother will find out that you're here and again try to kill you." And very soon the queen did go to her mirror. Imagine her horror when it said, "O queen, you are the fairest here, but on the far side of the high mountain wall, in the dwarf's neat and tidy home, Snow White is still the fairest of them all." Immediately, the queen sprang into action. Dressed as an old peddler woman, she set off across the mountains with a tray of ribbons. "Pretty things to buy," she called, and knocked at the dwarf's door. Snow White, who was looking out the window, fell in love with the lovely ribbons the old lady held up. What harm could there be? She opened the door. "This one, my pretty," the queen asked, as she fastened it around Snow White's neck and twisted and twisted. Snow White fell down as if she were dead, and that is how the dwarfs found her that night. They cut the ribbon, and slowly Snow White came back to life. It was her second escape. Next morning, the queen went to her mirror. How angry she was when she found that Snow White was still alive. She disguised herself again and set off across the mountains. "Pretty things to buy," she called by the dwarf's door. When Snow White saw the comb the old woman was holding up, She forgot all about the danger. She opened the door. "Your hair is so beautiful. Let me comb it for you," the queen said. But the comb was poisoned, and Snow White fell down as if dead. That night, the dwarfs removed the comb and brought Snow White back to life again. That was her third escape. When the queen went to her mirror next day, she found Snow White was still alive, and her fury knew no bounds. This time, she knew that she would need her most devilish magic. She prepared an apple that was poisoned on one side only. This time she set off disguised as an old beggar woman. "An apple for the pretty young lady," called the queen under Snow White's window. "It's free. No need to come to the door. I'll pass it through the window." She saw Snow White hesitate. "Not worried it's bad, are you?" The queen bit on into the side that wasn't poisoned. "See, it's perfect." She passed the rosy apple to Snow White. The moment Snow White bit into the poison, she fell to the ground. The queen peered in through the window. "Well, that's the end of you, my beauty," she said, "and good riddance." Back home she went, and next time she looked in her mirror, it told her that yes, she was the fairest of them all. How happy she was. This time, none of the dwarf's skills could bring Snow White back to life. After 3 days, they lost all hope, but strangely, she still looked alive. Instead of burying her, they put her in a glass coffin and set it on top of a high hill. Sometime later, a prince came to stay with the dwarfs. He saw Snow White in her coffin and immediately fell in love with her. "Let me take the coffin back to my palace or I'll die," he begged the dwarfs. The little men took pity on him and agreed, but as the princess's servants lifted the coffin, the piece of poisoned apple that had stuck in Snow White's throat was dislodged. She sat up wondering where she was, and the first thing she saw was the handsome young prince. It was love at first sight. Within a few weeks, she and the prince were engaged to be married. One of the wedding guests was Snow White's stepmother. As soon as she entered the room, she recognized Snow White, but this time she was powerless. The servants seized her, and the prince banished her to a faraway land where she could do no more harm. From that day on, Snow White was the happiest girl in the kingdom, as well as the most beautiful.